Someone is thinking about you far more than you realize, and the feelings they have are deeper than they ever expected. What caused it wasn't a grand gesture or some carefully planned move. It happened because of a quiet change within you. Before you dismiss this, stay with it for a moment. Sometimes the things that capture our attention do so for a reason. Maybe some for life, whether they are still close or have become distant, whose emotions have grown unexpectedly intense. And the person occupying their thoughts is you. The reason isn't because you chased after them, demanded answers, or asked for more than they could give. In fact, the opposite is true. Everything shifted because you stopped offering the endless emotional support, attention, and availability they had grown comfortable receiving. At some point, you made a decision that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic, and you probably didn't even tell anyone about it. There were no arguments, no announcements, and no attempts to make a point. You simply began choosing yourself. You stopped pouring all of your energy into people who rarely met you halfway. You stopped explaining yourself over and over just to be understood. You stopped carrying responsibilities that never truly belonged to you. Little by little, you reclaimed your own peace. That quiet choice naturally created distance, not because you wanted revenge or hoped someone would suffer, but because you finally realized that protecting yourself wasn't selfish. For the first time, you stopped sacrificing your own emotional well-being just to keep someone else comfortable. The person watching this unfold never expected that version of you. They were familiar with someone who always stayed, always listened, always forgave, and always made room for them. They believed your patience would never run out. They assumed your kindness would always be available whenever they decided they needed it. Because of that belief, they delayed putting in real effort. They postponed difficult conversations. They convinced themselves there would always be another opportunity to reconnect. In their mind, your presence felt permanent. Then, everything changed. When you stopped giving so much of yourself, they slowly began to notice what was missing. At first, it didn't seem significant. Maybe they thought you were simply busy or distracted by other priorities. But as time passed, your silence became impossible to ignore. The space you left behind grew louder with every passing day. That's when confusion started settling in. When someone becomes accustomed to having constant access to another person's care, its absence creates questions they never expected to ask. They begin replaying old conversations in their mind. Small moments they once overlooked suddenly carry new meaning. They remember your patience during times when they probably didn't deserve it. They start recognizing the value they overlooked while it was freely available. This is often where emotional attachment becomes even stronger. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, but because certainty disappeared. Once people realize they can no longer count on unlimited access to someone's time, attention, or emotional energy, they begin questioning their own decisions. They wonder why they didn't appreciate what they had. They ask themselves why they assumed you would always remain exactly the same. They begin seeing their own choices from a completely different perspective. Those thoughts often become strongest during quiet moments. Late at night, while scrolling through their phone, they may pause when they see your name. They may begin typing a message only to erase every word before sending it. Around other people, they may appear completely fine, yet privately, they carry emotions they don't fully understand. The reason runs much deeper than simple loneliness. You weren't just another person they talked to occasionally. You understood parts of them that few others ever noticed. You recognized emotions they tried to hide behind confidence or silence. Around you, they felt accepted without constantly needing to prove themselves. That kind of connection is difficult to replace. When someone loses a person who truly saw them, they aren't only grieving the relationship, they're also missing the version of themselves they experienced in your presence. They miss feeling understood. They miss feeling emotionally safe. They miss feeling known. Psychology explains this in a simple but powerful way. Human beings often overlook something valuable while it remains consistently available. Appreciation frequently arrives only after that consistency disappears. The value itself hasn't changed. The absence simply makes it impossible to ignore. Your distance removed something they quietly depended on. You had become a reflection of patience, understanding, encouragement, and emotional stability. Once that reflection disappeared, they were left facing themselves without the comfort they had grown accustomed to. At first, they probably tried distracting themselves. They buried themselves in work, spent more time with friends, kept busy with hobbies, or looked for temporary distractions. They convinced themselves they would eventually stop thinking about you. But distractions eventually fade, and when life becomes quiet again, your memory returns. That's when comparison naturally begins. They notice that conversations with other people don't feel the same. The comfort they experienced with you isn't easy to recreate. The emotional safety, understanding, and connection they once took for granted suddenly feels incredibly rare. And with every comparison, they become more aware of what they allowed to slip away. As time passes, they begin noticing that other conversations don't carry the same depth. New connections may be pleasant, but they don't offer the same sense of peace you once did. Slowly, an uncomfortable truth starts settling in. Without fully realizing it before, they had come to rely on you as a source of emotional stability. Now that your presence is no longer there in the same way, they feel unsettled. That realization often makes their emotions even stronger. They may experience regret, uncertainty, or a deep longing they struggle to explain. At the same time, their pride may fight against those feelings. One part of them wants to reach out and reconnect, while another part refuses to admit they allowed something meaningful to slip away. As a result, they remain trapped in endless mental loops, replaying memories, questioning their choices, and wondering what could have been different. Meanwhile, your life isn't centered around making a statement. You're simply no longer exhausting yourself trying to prove your worth. You aren't over-explaining your intentions or convincing anyone to appreciate you. You're allowing your actions or your silence to speak for themselves. Ironically, that quiet often communicates more than endless conversations ever could. It encourages reflection, invites accountability, and creates a distance that can't simply be ignored. There's something important to remember, though. Feeling strong emotions doesn't automatically mean someone has developed the maturity to handle them well. Missing someone is very different from knowing how to love them in a healthy way. A person can think about you constantly and still repeat the same harmful patterns if they haven't truly grown. Real transformation requires much more than regret. It takes self-awareness, honesty, responsibility, and consistent effort over time. Without those qualities, emotions simply become another cycle. Someone comes close, gets uncomfortable, pulls away, returns when they miss you, and then repeats the entire pattern again. That's why your decisions should never be based only on how deeply someone feels. Feelings matter, but behavior tells the real story. Consistency matters. Effort matters. Accountability matters. Those are the things that reveal whether someone has genuinely changed. The distance between you wasn't created to manipulate anyone or make them suffer. It happened because you finally chose yourself. That single decision completely shifted the balance of the relationship. You showed them what dependable care looked like without trying to control them. You offered patience without losing your identity. You loved without demanding perfection. Then, instead of continuing to overgive, you stepped back. Now they're left sitting with the absence of everything they quietly depended on. They're thinking about what they once had, what they overlooked, and what they assumed would always remain available. Those realizations aren't easy to carry. But something even more significant is happening beneath the surface. When you stepped away, you also removed the emotional shelter they had grown used to leaning on. Without that comfort, they're forced to face feelings they may have avoided for a long time. It's uncomfortable, but discomfort often becomes the beginning of genuine self-awareness. Silence has a way of revealing truths that constant distraction keeps hidden. Distance creates a kind of clarity that explanations often cannot. Even so, this is where you need to protect yourself. If you rush back simply because they're hurting, the lesson disappears. The old cycle begins again. They remain unchanged, and your own healing gets interrupted. The space that exists today is accomplishing something conversations alone never could. It's exposing unhealthy patterns, revealing what wasn't working, and bringing hidden truths into the open. One of those truths is especially important. The right person doesn't wait until they've lost you to recognize your value. They appreciate you while you're still standing beside them. They don't need absence to teach them what your presence was worth. So this season of your life isn't about proving yourself or convincing anyone to come back. It's about paying attention to what your absence reveals. If someone returns, let it be because they've genuinely grown, not because they're lonely, afraid, or uncomfortable with losing access to you. Lasting change is visible through consistent actions, not emotional promises. Anything less is simply the same story repeating itself in a different form. And if they never return, that doesn't reduce your value in any way. It simply means they weren't prepared for the kind of emotional honesty, depth, and connection you offered. What you gave was sincere. What you shared was meaningful. The bond was real. But not every meaningful relationship is meant to last forever. Some people enter our lives to teach us important lessons. Some challenge us to become stronger versions of ourselves. Others help us grow precisely because the relationship eventually ends. Their purpose wasn't permanence, it was transformation. Right now, you're changing too. You're beginning to recognize your own worth without needing someone else to confirm it. You're no longer willing to make yourself smaller just to keep someone comfortable. That shift isn't temporary. It's becoming part of who you are. Eventually, you'll notice something freeing. You won't feel compelled to chase explanations from people who remain uncertain about you. The right people won't need loss to recognize your value. They'll see it, appreciate it, and protect it while you're still present. Until then, allow this process to unfold naturally. Don't force answers. Don't rush toward outcomes simply because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Let time reveal what needs to be revealed. Even if you can't see everything happening behind the scenes, important changes are already taking place. The moment you stopped constantly reaching out, you also created room within yourself. That space was once filled with anxiety, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. At first, the silence may have felt strange because your mind had become accustomed to constant tension and unanswered questions. But that quiet isn't empty. It's a sign that you're slowly finding your way back to yourself. Beneath all the emotional noise, you're reconnecting with the person you were always meant to be. Your thoughts may still drift toward them from time to time, simply because habits don't disappear overnight. That's completely natural, and it doesn't mean you're moving backward. It simply means you're learning to let go while continuing to move forward. Habits don't disappear overnight. They fade little by little. But one thing has already changed in a powerful way. You've stopped sacrificing yourself just to keep a relationship alive. For the first time, whatever connection still exists is no longer being held together by your effort alone. It's standing on what is actually true. And truth is always stronger than one-sided effort that never receives the same energy in return. Many people mistake silence for weakness, but that's rarely what it is. Sometimes silence is the strongest choice a person can make. It means you've stopped carrying emotional responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. It means you've stopped depending on someone else's approval to feel complete. That inner change doesn't need an announcement. People sense it without you saying a single word. The person you're connected to feels that something is different. They may not know exactly how to explain it, but they recognize the shift. Looking back, they begin realizing how much comfort they found in your presence without ever fully appreciating it. They became accustomed to your kindness, your consistency, and your willingness to understand them. Only after losing easy access to those things do they begin to understand how important they truly were. Now there's an empty space where your presence used to be. That absence changes the way they think. They replay conversations, revisit old memories, and imagine different choices they could have made. Reflection often begins only after certainty disappears. Once someone realizes they can no longer assume you'll always be there, they start seeing the relationship through a completely different lens. They remember how life felt when you were close. They remember how naturally they leaned on your encouragement, your patience, and your emotional stability. Without those things, life feels less grounded. Even if they hide it well, something inside them feels unsettled. While they're sorting through those emotions, you're experiencing a different kind of transformation. Of course, there are moments when doubt appears. You might question whether you walked away too soon or whether you should have given one more chance. But eventually, you return to the question that matters most. Did you step away to hurt someone, or did you step away because staying was slowly hurting you? Deep down, you already know the answer. You left because you could no longer ignore yourself. You realized that love should never require you to abandon your own needs or silence your own feelings. A healthy relationship allows both people to grow. It doesn't slowly erase one person while the other remains comfortable. Walking away wasn't an act of failure. It was an act of self-respect. It was the moment your actions finally matched what your heart had been trying to tell you for a long time. Without saying a word, you also communicated something important. You showed that your heart isn't available without care, respect, and mutual effort. Your presence isn't something to be taken for granted forever. If this person is willing to grow, that realization may inspire real change. If they're unwilling, then your distance becomes protection instead of punishment. Either way, you've stepped out of a cycle that could only continue causing pain. Growth doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like grieving the future you hoped would happen. But grief doesn't automatically mean you made the wrong decision. Often it simply means you're letting go of expectations that no longer fit the reality in front of you. You gave what you genuinely could, and when giving more began costing your peace, you chose to stop. That's what healthy boundaries are meant to do. Boundaries aren't designed to punish anyone. They're meant to create clarity. They define where your responsibility ends and where another person's responsibility begins. You aren't responsible for rescuing someone from the consequences of choices they repeatedly made themselves. As you continue healing, your mind and body begin learning something entirely new. Love doesn't have to feel like constant uncertainty. It doesn't have to leave you anxious every day. Once you experience that truth, it becomes difficult to settle for anything less again. Even if someone eventually returns, you won't be able to become the same version of yourself who ignored warning signs and accepted emotional confusion as normal. Awareness permanently changes the way you love. Right now, you're living in the space between who you used to be and who you're becoming. That middle ground isn't always comfortable, but it's where lasting change takes shape. Gradually, your thoughts become quieter. The urge to constantly analyze their behavior begins fading. You stop searching for hidden signs in every silence or every message. Instead, something much steadier begins growing inside you. A calm confidence rooted in acceptance. You no longer need endless explanations to validate what happened. You understand that the connection was genuine, but you also recognize that genuine feelings alone aren't enough when two people aren't emotionally ready at the same time. That realization doesn't harden your heart. It opens it in a healthier direction. You're no longer putting your own life on hold while waiting for someone else to figure themselves out. Step by step, you're moving forward again. Interestingly, they begin noticing that movement too. They realize your life isn't standing still anymore. Your energy no longer revolves around them, and that changes everything. Without trying to force anything, your absence creates the very space they once avoided. When your attention is no longer filling that space, their own thoughts begin filling it instead. Memories return naturally. They remember your patience, your consistency, and the countless ways you showed up without expecting applause. They also begin recognizing how easily they overlooked those gifts while they still had them. Perhaps the hardest realization isn't simply missing you, it's missing the version of themselves that existed when they felt genuinely understood by you. People often grieve more than a relationship. They grieve the person they became in the presence of someone who truly saw them. By stepping away, you removed the emotional comfort they had quietly come to depend on, and now they're left discovering what that comfort was really worth. That's why memories of you continue to surface in their mind. It isn't because you're trying to pull them back or hold on to them. Ironically, it's because you stopped doing exactly that. The moment you stopped reaching, something shifted. Your absence created space where your constant presence once existed, and that space became impossible for them to ignore. This is where many people get confused. Intense emotions don't automatically mean someone knows how to build a healthy relationship. Feeling love is not the same as understanding how to express it. Missing someone doesn't instantly create emotional maturity. A person can care deeply and still lack the self-awareness, consistency, or emotional skills needed to show up in the way a relationship truly requires. That's why this moment isn't about returning to what once felt comfortable. It's about recognizing what actually changed. You gave them something genuine. You were consistent without trying to control them. You were present without creating pressure or demanding perfection. You offered care freely, but when that care stopped being respected, you chose to step back instead of losing yourself trying to hold everything together. Now they're experiencing the silence your absence created, and silence often speaks more clearly than words ever can. Distance has a way of revealing truths that constant closeness keeps hidden. When someone no longer has unlimited access to your time, energy, and attention, they're left alone with their own thoughts. That's where reflection begins. There may come a day when they try to re-enter your life. Sometimes they'll understand exactly why they're reaching out. Other times they won't. They may simply want to know whether the door is still open, or whether they still have the same access they once assumed would always exist. If that moment comes, your strength will matter more than ever. Responding from loneliness or old habits only recreates the same cycle. Remaining grounded changes everything. It requires both people to face reality instead of slipping back into familiar patterns that never truly worked. Most people avoid that kind of discomfort because real growth demands honesty. It asks us to acknowledge our mistakes, take responsibility, and become someone different instead of simply hoping things will feel the same again. There will probably still be moments when memories suddenly return. Certain songs, places, or quiet evenings may remind you of them. That's completely normal. It doesn't mean you're supposed to go backward. It simply means the connection mattered. Meaningful relationships always leave an imprint, but not every meaningful relationship is meant to remain exactly as it was. Some people enter our lives to teach lessons that permanently change us. Once those lessons have been learned, the purpose of that relationship begins to evolve. If this person ever comes back, let it be because they've genuinely become capable of meeting you with the same honesty, consistency, and emotional responsibility you've been offering all along. Let their actions demonstrate growth, instead of relying on promises or temporary emotions. Anything less isn't a fresh beginning. It's simply another version of the old pattern. And if they never return, don't mistake that as evidence that you were difficult to love. It simply means they weren't emotionally prepared for the depth, vulnerability, and authenticity you brought into the relationship. The right connection won't require you to become smaller just to make someone else comfortable. It won't leave you constantly explaining your intentions or waiting in uncertainty for someone to choose you. Healthy love creates security, not confusion. The reason these words feel so familiar is because a part of you already knows they're true. You're no longer the person who accepted inconsistency as normal. You're becoming someone who values inner peace more than emotional chaos. You'd rather protect your well-being than endlessly chase clarity from someone unwilling to provide it. When you stepped away, you didn't simply remove yourself from their world. You also removed the reflection they had quietly depended on. Your attention, your compassion, and your willingness to understand them had become a mirror that reflected parts of themselves they rarely examined. Without that mirror, they're left facing themselves more honestly. At first, they may try staying busy. They may distract themselves with work, social activities, or new experiences. They may convince themselves the feeling will eventually disappear. But time has a way of stripping away distractions. Eventually, the silence becomes impossible to ignore. Memories return. Conversations replay in their mind. They wonder where everything began changing. They question decisions they once felt certain about. They start connecting pieces they couldn't see before. Yet the deepest realization is remarkably simple. You didn't walk away because your feelings disappeared. You walked away because you finally realized your own heart deserved the same care you had been giving everyone else. For someone who benefited from your presence without fully appreciating it, that's a difficult truth to accept. While this inner process unfolds for them, your own life continues moving in a healthier direction. You're no longer reshaping yourself to make someone else comfortable. You're no longer over-giving, over-explaining, or stretching yourself beyond healthy limits in hopes of earning love. Instead, you're learning balance. You're discovering that compassion doesn't require self-neglect. You can love deeply without abandoning your own needs. You can remain gentle without allowing people to drain your energy. You can stay open-hearted while still protecting your peace. That combination is where real strength lives. It's kindness without losing yourself. It's softness supported by healthy boundaries. It's love that exists without emotional dependence. As you continue moving forward, another truth becomes clearer. Peace isn't something another person hands to you. It's something you create through the choices you make every day, the boundaries you honor, and the honesty you show yourself about what you will and won't accept. Whatever existed between you and this person was real. It mattered. It shaped both of you in important ways. But it was never meant to become the entire story of your life. It was one meaningful chapter. Now, instead of staying trapped on the same page, you're finally finding the strength to turn it and continue writing the next part of your story.